Welcome to The Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. So without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. I'm humbled and honored and thrilled to be in the virtual studio with Olivia Lane. Olivia and I met via TikTok, and she commented on one of our Currency of Grief posts, and we met, and I really wanted to get her on the podcast. Olivia's mom adopted her when her mom was 39 years old. She grew up in a small town in North Carolina. In June of 2024, Olivia's mom passed away. And what's interesting about Olivia's story is, for one, her mom's philosophy on money and how her philosophy changed before and after her passing, how Olivia navigated staying in North Carolina to care for her mom and then being there with family after her passing while sort of having a home base and living and working in Florida as a young adult. How her mom outlined every detail of her instructions of her memorial service down to the very playlist. How she started helping her family navigate her mom's estate and learning about the types of accounts she was inheriting and how she should use the funds, deeding her mom's home into her name ahead of time to make life easier, and therefore asking family members to think about this process and formalize their own estate plans and clearly designate executors and titling of their own. So Olivia has a very unique perspective on grief and money as are you 24 years old?
25, but yeah.
25-year-old?
24 at the time, for sure.
24 at the time, exactly. So Olivia, really happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, what made you want to come on the podcast and what made you want to reach out on TikTok?
I think I really wanted to come on the podcast because I was 24 when my mom passed away, and not very many people that I knew at that time had ever lost a parent in that time frame of their life. Even people older than me, a lot of them had not had this happen to them. And so I obviously, with the internet and all these kinds of things, was looking around at podcasts and social media platforms and books and figuring out grief as a whole and other opinions and how people were coping and what kind of things they were going through. And then I assume that led my algorithm to your TikTok page, The Currency of Grief. And so it popped up, and I scrolled through some clips, and I was like, I feel like I have some things that I would love for someone else to be able to hear as well, if they're going through something similar. And that was kind of what made me reach out, because I also didn't have very many. Obviously, all my friends would listen to whatever I had to say, but they didn't have very many. They're just kind of like, okay, about it. So I think just hoping that I can be able to be another source, if someone else is in a similar position at some point in their life.
Definitely. Yeah, it sounds like there weren't a lot of other 24-year-olds thinking about and talking about and navigating the circumstance that you went through, as well as the fact that talking about losing a parent young, because unfortunately it's inevitably going to happen to all of us unless we predecease our parents, allows you to find comfort in that community that other people are unfortunately going through it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big community person, so I think finding those little niche pockets of people, and I even had a couple of friends, I guess, that I didn't quite, they were acquaintances at the time, and I would say more friends now, where
That's awesome.
we kind of got to speak about it because they had gone through something similar. But even hearing about other people's financial positions that they were in when that happened, when they had a parent pass away, was tended to be very different than my own experience,
Hmm.
just because of how much my mom had planned.
Wow. Well, we'll talk about all of that, and learn about how much you planned, but also the community that supported you along the way. But before we do, here in the currency of grief, we don't unfortunately shy away from the adversity. We dive right in. So, Olivia, tell us a little bit about your grief story and a little bit about the timeline leading up to your mom's passing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, she adopted me when she was 39. So I was 7 months old. Huge generational gaps between her and I, as well as the rest of her family or the rest of her sisters. And so my oldest aunt is 85, and my mom was the youngest of all of her siblings. At 63, she started to have some health issues. Nothing was really adding up. She was seeing a lot of different specialists like ENTs, but also going to her regular physician. And at some point in that timeline, I would say that was around 3 months of her kind of hopping around to different places to figure out maybe what was going on. And then she had a stroke.
Hmm.
She got admitted to the hospital. A few days went by of her being there. They released her. My family likes to call me after things happen. So I knew she had had a stroke, and then I knew she was out of the hospital. And I would say outside of that, that was about as much information as my family gave me, just because they tend to think that I wouldn't come back for some reason, but that is what they chose to do. And I said, okay, like, let me know kind of how things are looking from then on out. Um, she went through a PET scan where they found stage 1 lung cancer, but they said that it was isolated, and they said that they would be able to get it all. And they were debating on radiation or surgical, removing it surgically. And so I would say they were around the 1 month mark of figuring out which treatment they were going to go along with. And then she had another stroke like incident where my family had to call an ambulance, and she went back to the hospital. This time they did call me. It was a longer weekend. So I kind of made plans to go back up there. I went back up there. Um, her body was not holding sodium, and she was pretty delirious, I would say. I would say she kind of came in and out, but there were multiple times where that she was hearing or seeing things or having conversations with me where I wasn't exactly sure what she was speaking of. She was having really interesting like visions of some sort too.
Hmm.
I can laugh at it. I mean, even then, sometimes they were so crazy that it was still kind of funny.
Hmm.
And that happened, and then I was kind of in the process of moving apartments in Florida. And so I went up to North Carolina after that second stroke like incident. I talked with neurology. They had done some scans of her brain, and they said that they didn't see any signs of a second stroke. So he was pretty positive that it wasn't a stroke that time. And he did say that they saw a narrowing of her blood vessels in her brain,
Hmm.
and that typically only happens if something is causing some sort of irritation. So he was, I think, suggesting that it was some sort of cancer, but that I would obviously have to speak with oncology before anyone could give me a definitive. Um, with him, I did have to call my aunt then as well, who is the closest in age to my mother, and tell her the news. And I think that was very interesting. And then I spoke with oncology. They had done a lumbar puncture. It all came back negative. They thought maybe she had had some encephalitis, which I guess is something that can happen after a stroke. It's just an infection of the brain. And oncology, had done one lumbar puncture. It had come back negative for all things, but they typically take three. All three have to come back negative in order for them to not assume that it is cancer. So I signed off on the second lumbar puncture. I had to get back to Florida to work. And so I did that, came back to Florida. I worked for one day. I was at work the next night. My mom started calling me from her phone, which was odd, but not super odd because my aunt had been using it, but it was weird. Just the timing of it, I guess. It came up as her. And so I step outside because all of my coworkers knew that there was like family things going on. Stepped outside, and then that's when my mom was just like, "Hey, like this was the most, also probably the most clear she had been in thinking and communicating with me since I had seen her beforehand." And she basically just said like the lung cancer had spread to brain cancer, and that she did not want to fight it, and that I should probably figure out a way to come home and get things settled up there for a while. There
Wow.
wasn't exact, yeah, there was an exact timeline. Um, that's kind of just how all of that happened. And then like I said, I was in between leases, so I put all of my stuff in a storage unit. I ended up not moving into that second apartment space and just paying for a storage unit instead,
Mhm.
and drove back to North Carolina with a car full of my things that I thought I would need over the next 6 months or so.
Wow.
And
So you kind of knew that you were like, hey, I'm packing for an unforeseen amount of time.
yes, I basically, it felt, I call it a pause in my life, is essentially what it felt like to me,
Yeah.
because I took a break from work. I packed, like I said, just maybe 6 months worth of stuff because I wasn't sure what anything looked like past the next couple of weeks. But I knew I didn't have to be in an apartment, I didn't have to pay rent here. And so that was a little bit of an easier transition to just go to North Carolina to be with my family.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then once I got up there, she had chosen to be in my hometown home under hospice care. And over the course of a week, my aunt and I were taking care of her and giving medication. And at that point, and we could tell that at that point, it's all about just comfort, and not having any pain, or anxiety. And so we were just doing medications every day for about a week. And then um, that morning was when it was like the following week exactly from when I got there. The nurse came and she said that she had passed away.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Olivia, what was your relationship like with your mom?
I would definitely say, from a really young age, my mom said that she could tell I was going to wander. My whole family lives exactly right on top of each other, barely a block away in my very small hometown. And she said probably by the time I was 7, she knew that I was going to travel a lot and I would not be staying in that hometown, at least for a while. And so I think growing up, there was always a part of me that wanted to leave this hometown, whereas my family felt very settled there. And I think due to just a generational difference, um, I just had a lot of different thoughts and opinions. I tend to be a little bit more free, whereas I think my family tends to sit more conservatively. And so I think growing up, especially in my teenage years, I think she was really just trying to wrangle me in a little bit, and just kind of check the boxes that a lot of parents have for their kids, like graduating high school and then graduating college and getting a degree, and then hopefully getting a salary job. And I think I really fought that system hard because it wasn't necessarily what I felt like at my age I wanted to do.
Yeah. So what were you doing at the time?
Um, a little bit of too much of a delinquent in high school. Barely graduated high school, but I realized it was my way. It was the only way I was going to leave my hometown.
Hmm.
So if
So that
I,
motivated you?
yes, if I didn't graduate high school, I would not be able to leave. And so we have three stoplights and like barely 2,000 people, and it just was
Wow.
too small for me because everyone knew me. And I was ready to go. So finished high school, got to college, got to just hang out there. But I would say our relationship differed once I got to college and kind of stepped away for a while. I think it gave her some space and gave me some space to kind of, she can now be her own person again with my family. And then I can kind of be my own person and I'm not under watch. And if I am doing something that she wouldn't love, she doesn't know necessarily. And so I think that I get to now be more selective on what she knows. And I think that that helped our relationship just, I think, is natural in growing up. And so I would say our relationship really strengthened from like when I was 18 until the time I was 24.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
She had her, it seemed like she was being protective over you and not wanting you to wander so much, even though you were an inevitable wanderer. And then so when you did wander and she was able to come to terms with that, it sounds like you guys bonded and got closer.
Yes. Yes. I think it got a lot better for our relationship when we both kind of had our own space. And like you
Mm,
said, it's kind of, it gives you time to miss people and things like that.
definitely. And being from a small town and from like your adopted mom, how did she raise you to talk about money, and how was money talked about in your town and your family?
I would say my mom just really, because of her age difference between me, I think this was before YOLO was a thing and things like that. And so she was very much a saver and just very frugal with her money. She would not make excessive purchases that were unnecessary. I would definitely say she was a little bit more strict on things that she was purchasing. She still traveled and did a bunch of stuff, and we still did family plans for vacations and things like that. So there was no lack of fun, but there was definitely this idea that saving is the only way that once you retire, you'll be able to live. Um, and so I think
True.
that that was extremely pushed into my life to the point where I think once I got older, I was like, I don't necessarily want to abide by these rules all the
Mm.
time.
So we'll get further into the money section in a second, but if I'm doing my math right, your mom was about like in her early 60s. Is that correct?
Hmm.
And so did did she end up retiring?
She had been retired for 1 year at the time that she had passed. She worked um, until she was 62. And so she
Wow.
had just retired. Yeah.
So she spent all this time saving up her money over multi-year career, call it maybe 30, maybe 40 years, just to retire and have 1 year. And I'm sure, I mean, given the background and the timeline that you talked about, it was a lot of medical treatment and not necessarily a year of travel and exploration.
Yeah. I think that year, a lot of people just use it to relax and kind of just try to kind of calm down and settle themselves, just going from working full time. And after COVID, she ended up working from home the majority of the time. So she had her little office set up in my hometown house and things like that. Um, but she hadn't done too much traveling the year prior, I don't think.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as we talk about the emotions here, there's obviously a lot that come with this. So, what was the hardest or most unexpected feeling that you had to deal with immediately after her loss?
I think immediately after her loss, I really compartmentalized a lot of my feelings at that time. Um, I was just surrounded by a bunch of family that I think, from my perspective, knew my mom better than I did
Mm,
because they had grown up with her whole life. So, sure, I knew her for 24 years, but my aunts and her older sisters and things like that have all known her for 62, 63 years,
Yeah.
since she was the baby. And I think that I do tend to try to put their feelings ahead of mine because I understand that although the loss is the same for everyone, from my point of view, it did feel like they were experiencing a bigger loss because she was just so much more of a part of their lives, um, for more of their lives. And so a lot of what I did for those first few, I would say 2 or 3 months, was a lot of just around my family. I was the one that was very neutral. I was the one that kind of stayed very even keel. I did not have emotions. I definitely feel like I took over the role of kind of protecting my family from other, I say other people, in that like there were a lot of questions and a lot of people that wanted to talk to my family, and I kind of became that middle person of
Hmm.
communication so that my family wasn't being bombarded by visitors and people in general coming to say nice things. The sentiment is obviously there, but my family does tend to be a little bit more private, and my family does tend to lean more towards less socializing. And so I just feel like I stood kind of in the middle and tried to help with the communications and be the messenger. And so for the first little bit, the hardest part was just trying to keep staying neutral,
Mm.
essentially.
Were there like feelings underneath the surface that you wanted to let out, and how did you cope and process?
I would just say I did all of that relatively privately. At this point, I was living back in my hometown house, and my aunts had gone back to their homes, which I mean, still are not very far away. But I did have moments like those, and I think a lot of the beginning part was me kind of just distracting myself. I would stay in my hometown for a few days of the week, and then I would visit friends in the Wilmington area of North Carolina and hang out with them during the weekends, sometimes for up to 10 to 12 days during the summer,
Wow.
because I my life was paused and I wasn't the one every day having to talk with the lawyer because I wasn't the executor. And so because of that, it was all kind of a waiting game for me. I didn't necessarily even know if I wanted to come back to Florida at that time. I was thinking about maybe staying in North Carolina and pivoting my whole life into a different career path. And a lot of that was just very interesting for that time period. But I would say that I just coped mainly by having some family time, making sure that things that they needed done or things that they had planned were getting done, as well as just kind of trying to spend time with my friends and community, for
Hmm.
the first little bit. I would say that I didn't really start processing a lot of it until I came back to Florida, like 4 months later.
Wow. Were there any friends or people in your community who like really gave you a lot of support, or was it just sort of being around people? Like I know we were talking about volleyball before we pressed play here, and so like that community for me, like going out and playing sports, playing golf, um, definitely took my mind off of it.
Yeah. Um, in North Carolina, I would definitely say that it was a lot of just like beach time, bar time, being weird and doing crazy things with my friends. And then I would say once I got back to Florida, I've worked with the brand that I work with and the girls that work here, for more than a couple of years now. And so they were definitely a community, as well as I got to really lean into volleyball as well and just
That's
have that
awesome.
community of support to kind of move around and be physical. And sometimes I like to call it productive procrastination, where maybe there are things you need to deal with and do, but if I go play volleyball, I'm not just sitting around on my couch. At least I'm being active for several hours and I still get to be around people.
Yeah, it's important to be active.
Yeah, exactly. Productive.
Exactly. No, that's great. So yeah, it sounds like you emotionally played the role of the peacemaker and keeping everyone neutral and being there to console your family members. And it sounds like you felt that your family, your mom's family, who had been with her for many 62, 64 years. um, they needed your support. And I think a lot of younger people, they do put their emotions on the shelf for a little bit to take care of other family members. um, and so was there a moment, you mentioned when you went back to Florida, but was there a moment when everything shifted for you, that you were finally able to like address those feelings and um, really think about all that, the grief?
I would say like I think it just kind of came slowly. I ended up coming back to Florida because I got offered a salary position with the brand that I'd worked for over 4 years. And so um, I came back to Florida to be able to take over that position. And I think when I got back to Florida and I moved back into an apartment, I kind of, it was, I don't know, maybe just in a new place, in a new apartment with a new job now, that like the only person that I would really want to talk to about was the first person, at least, would be my mom. Just because that's something that she really pushed me to have at some point in my life, sooner rather than later.
Mhm.
Was like a career, a salaried job that would offer me a little bit more stability than my hourly bartending that I still love a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that was definitely a turning point of like, oh, this is kind of the most recent happy news or bigger news that I've received in a while since her passing. And so I think having that job and starting that position when I came back down to Florida, I think every day for a while was just a little tough because it was like, oh, I'm doing something that like that my mom had really pushed me to do for a while. And I would say it's just been a lot of time alone besides being out with community and working. A lot of that was the time to kind of like sit back. And I'm not a public crier. I'm not a very emotionally public person at all. And so a lot of my time was spent just kind of by myself in my car, in my apartment. I do have a cat, so with him, and just kind of dealing with that. Several breakdowns, lots of crying by myself. But I mean, I think everyone that has experienced grief can understand that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and then I would say, because of the immense amount of compartmentalization that I did earlier on, I did find times in public settings where something would happen and I would not know how to react emotionally. Not that it was ever crazy, but I would be like, oh, I might cry right now, but I'm going to try my hardest not to.
Yeah. Was there one that like stood out?
Um, Yeah, there was a movie I was watching, and a girl runs into her hometown house after not being there for a while. She had moved from like Oklahoma to New York and was back in Oklahoma. And she runs in and she's like, "Hey, mom," or something like that. And I think that was when I was like, "Oh, I'm never going to do that again."
Mm.
Um, so I think that was a bigger emotional time, but I was with other people. And so I kind of refused to cry in that moment. But that was probably one of the weird first time experiences of like, oh, like, that's weird. I'm not going to do that ever again.
Yeah. That's challenging. A lot of things that you said I resonated with a lot. So the first off, the slow moments when you're alone, when you're in the car or in your apartment and you're alone and you have your independence, you're kind of embarking on this adulthood, you're at the stage where you're like you're figuring it out, and the first person that you want to call is, in your case, your mom, or in my case, my dad. There's that
Hmm.
person that is not there anymore, and that's super
Yeah.
emotional. That's challenging. And furthermore, when you do achieve some level of success or finally get that salary job that they've been wanting for you, and that's the person that you want to tell the most, or you're navigating. Like, I had a challenging first job out of college, and my dad was always that person that we'd plan for like 21 years of my life to say, all right, like, you're going to be super successful in the working world. Like, you just did, 18 years of schooling. Um, and then you embark on adulthood, and that person that you just spent 18 years preparing with is no longer there. So you can't share the wins or the losses or the adversity that you face along the way with that person.
Yeah, it's definitely hard.
Yeah.
Since the last time you and I spoke, actually, I have a friend that is unfortunately going to lose his father rather soon. And so it's very interesting kind of comparing stories in that way where um, he's like, I definitely will come to you for advice at some point. And I'm sitting there like, man, I don't even know if I've got any right now on like how to, of course, everyone has feelings and thoughts and opinions on it. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if I'm that person. But then again, I reached out to you on this podcast. So I guess I have some things to say.
Yeah, you do. But even the important part is understanding that unfortunately we're not going to bring our people back, but you can also be there to listen, to validate emotions, to be an ear, to congratulate the person if they accomplish something well or are facing adversity, whether it's financial or through work or career or whatever it might be. Um, they need that extra person. We need that extra person to go to. And that's why one of the reasons that I started this podcast is because someone listening is going to be like, wow, my story is really similar to Olivia's. Like, I'm not alone in this.
Right. Yeah. I definitely think that that is helpful for sure. And I think sometimes it's not even, I don't even think words are needed all the time either.
Exactly. Silence is,
Especially, yeah.
we call it sitting in the mud.
I've never heard that, I don't think. But
Just sitting in the mud with somebody.
yeah.
It sucks, but we're here together.
And I think that's the biggest part. You just got somebody that you can go, wow, okay, this sucks. And then you both just are like, yep, this sucks. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, speaking about a part that sucks, let's transition to the money aspect of your journey. So, your mom passed away, in home hospice, some medical procedures leading up. What happened next from a financial and logistics standpoint? Did you have bills from the medical, like hospice or anything like that? And then talk to us about what happened with her memorial service.
Okay. Yeah. So I was not the executor. So a lot of this is kind of secondhand on what's happening. My cousin was the one that was speaking with the lawyer, but my mom was ridiculously organized and
Hmm.
prepared and planned. So she had a will and she had memorial service points outlined. And the financial side was that almost everything was taken care of. It got taken towards, I guess they take the money in their bank account and kind of put it into essentially an estate account
Yeah.
where that all that's where all the bills and all the kind of the last whatever will get taken out of. So that happened for a while. We did receive lots and lots and lots of bills that I think are still somehow coming in even now.
The bills?
Yeah, even though, and I think unfortunately at this time, I think a lot of people potentially use it as a scam to say, like, oh, this person owes me money. And you're like, well, that was more than a year ago. I think we would have known if we still owed you money.
Yeah.
And so that's currently, I think, kind of what's going on.
Wow.
Um, yeah. But at that time, we just paid off the bills that she needed to have paid off through the hospital or through the hospice care or through other treatments, like, or the ambulance and things like that. And then because she was so organized and planned, there was already a plan for the percentage and kind of who got what when it came to her IRA accounts. Because, like I said earlier, She was extremely savvy and very much saved money. And so she had only been using her retirement accounts for a year.
Yeah.
And so we have a family financial advisor. I probably had a meeting with him a couple of weeks after where, thank goodness, he walked me through essentially everything that was about to happen, which were that her accounts would then turn into beneficiary accounts that were in my name. And there's the 10 years that you have to have all of that money taken out of those accounts and put into other accounts, or just
Right.
it just has to be emptied within the next 10 years. So
Yeah.
him and I kind of set up a plan. I'd say he gave me about 6 months or so to determine what percentages those accounts would stay at. She had a 401 as well as a Roth. And because that 401 is going to be taken out of my taxes it will be taxed every year. We chose to do 11% over the course of the next 10 years. That way, by the 10th year, it would be empty. And
Yeah.
then with that Roth, because it is already taxed, it can actually sit there until the 10-year mark, and just then it can all be transferred somewhere else.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
So,
yeah,
so just to add some clarity there, um, it doesn't mean you have this money in a beneficiary IRA or beneficiary Roth IRA. That doesn't mean, hey, you have to take everything out within 10 years. All right, you have to go like spend it. No, like you can still have it invested, but it just has to be taken out of the IRA wrapper. And then it could be put in like a taxable brokerage account that you can invest for your own future. And if you have income coming in like you do, you can put it in to your own personal Roth IRA. It just has to be taken out of the beneficiary account. But take us back. Obviously, your mom was very diligent in planning. And so take us back to like the memorial service. What was it like to like did you guys have a conversation about what she wanted before she passed away, or did she pass away and then you went into like a drawer and you were like, okay, I found the memorial service file. Here's like, what did the outline say and how did it make you
yeah. When I think I was around 15. We obviously had just like some sort of family laptop, and I don't know if I was doing schoolwork or what, but I came across memorial service notes when I was 15, which at that time was crazy to think about, like, oh, that's so sad kind of thing. And then I kind of forgot that they ever existed, um, until she passed. And I went, I bet there's some sort of updated file on her
feel?
laptop now. So I go in, my family, because of kind of how private they are, they didn't, if we couldn't find these memorial service notes, if I could not find them, they were very much okay with not doing anything because they did not want a lot of people involved, or to really like talk with anyone at that time. But I guess unfortunately for them, I did find memorial service notes, in an Excel spreadsheet, line by line. There's probably like 15 bullet points of what time she wants it to start, who she wants to start, who she wants to sing what specific song, what Bible verses she wanted read and by who, how she wanted the table layout to look, how she wanted the first 15 or 20 minutes when people are arriving, the songs that she wanted to play for those 15 to 20 minutes. She had notes on what she wanted written in her obituary that I wrote.
Wow.
And so she really had it all laid out in a document. All I did was print it out and I gave it to two of my hometown pastors, and we just went and we did it. Um,
So that's amazing. She literally wrote her obituary before she passed away. A lot of times I just had to do that for a family member, unfortunately. And a lot of times that's part of the reflection, sadness, burden that someone may leave to someone. So how did that having those plans written down in as much detail as they were, how did that help you? How did that make you feel?
I think it just showed how ready and how okay my mother was with passing. She had no fear in ever passing. She was like, it's going to happen one day. I don't know what day it's going to be, but here are all the plans for when it does happen. And I think that takes a lot of overall peace and just contentment in her life where she was like, whenever it happens, my
Yeah.
family's kind of set up to do what I want, and this is the plan. And so I think when presented with those sort of things, it allowed me to have more peace because of how prepared she was.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the case. You are able to feel all the feelings and the emotions and not work on the logistical side of your brain of, oh, we have to play this music and have this person. No, like, here's the plan. This is what she wanted. Go, like, let's go execute it so that we can feel at peace and reflect. And I would say a lot of people think, when they think financial around dying, they think about saving taxes or costs or whatever. But having this sort of plan written down of funeral and memorial service, I mean, that's an amazing gift you can give to your heirs, your loved ones, for your legacy.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So, so you mentioned you stayed up in North Carolina a while after, met with your family financial advisor, beneficiary IRAs were opened. Was there anything else like, and I think your mom had a pension, right? Was there anything unique about like the pension or taxes or those other financial nuances?
Um, I randomly got a call one day from a number that was not saved in my phone, and it was a person from Fidelity, and they basically were like, "Are you Olivia?" And I was like, "Yes." And then they were like, "This is what's going to happen. This amount of money is going to be in your bank account or deposited every month until 2028." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Because I didn't know what they were talking about. I knew about the IRAs that my mother had set up through our financial advisor over her years to be able to retire, but I didn't necessarily think about a pension at all. And this was probably 3 months or so after she had passed. They just called me, and it's one of those things where like your immediate first response is like, "This is a scam. You want me to give you my bank information?" Like that's weird.
Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't. They sent the all the paperwork that I needed to fill out, and so I think that was another thing that was rather surprising. Was just that there's nothing I that just is what's going to happen. This is just the next step in the fact that she was receiving this pension and now I am the receiver of this pension. And that's it.
Wow. What did your mom do for work?
She was a brand like manager for Hanes, actually.
Oh, wow. So a lot
Mhm.
of big companies and a lot of public institutions, teachers, doctors, stuff like that have police officers, have pensions. And it's, if you're navigating the loss of someone who's in one of those roles, that may be a benefit that you can look into for the benefit of your heirs. And for you, tell us, how did you navigate to, I mean, did you inherit, and you don't have to give it exact numbers, what was it, like a couple $1,000, a couple $100,000, a couple $1 million? Like, was it life-changing money? And what type what type of how did you change your decisions to, now that you had this money, how did you navigate your inheritance and what did you do to spend it or save it?
Yeah, I think my family's financial advisor, he actually went to school with my mom for their whole lives. So they
Wow.
very close. I do tend to hop the line of I only live once, and also I need to prepare if I live till I'm 95. And that part just comes from my mom. I think I naturally kind of skew more, well, maybe I only live till next week. We don't know. But I think also just as you get older, that you kind of stay a little bit more on that line as well. And
Yeah.
so, um, my family financial advisor kind of sits me down in a meeting and he's like, okay, if you don't touch any of this money, because we opened a taxable account so that that 10% or 11% could be transferred into there. And then we also opened up a Roth IRA for myself, in my own name. And also, we supplemented basically what would have been my income over 4 months of not working.
Mm-hmm.
So that got taken out and put directly into my bank account. And then the rest of it, with that 11%, he basically was like, if you allow this to be a 1-for-1, and like everything we take out of this beneficiary account, we put it into this account, you can basically never save or put money into any IRA account again, and you'll still have probably like, it was $5 to $7 million to retire by the time I'm 59 and a half.
Yeah.
And then with a pension, it was enough for me to not necessarily have to like worry about rent. And so my salary kind of ends up being the money that I can save and have fun with. And the pension kind of just covers my like regular expenses every month. Which I think is a huge, huge safety net that I feel very fortunate to have,
For
just
sure.
because of how much time that my mom spent saving and how important that was to her.
Yeah. It's super interesting because we talked, I think society still doesn't talk enough about estate planning, but they really don't talk a lot about an inheritance plan. And so you basically had to take what you believed were the values of your mom and yourself and kind of mold the two into, all right, what am I going to do with this money that's coming in? And it sounds like what you did was, hey, I'm going to set myself up with her money. I'm going to set myself up for retirement to make sure that when I'm 59 and a half, 60, whenever I want to, hang it up, I'm going to have enough money so that I don't have to worry. And number two, I'm going to take care of my basic needs and the safety, which is the roof over my head. And then with your money, it sounds like you're using it to both to really everybody has discretionary expenses and you do only live once. And so to be able to enjoy time with your family, your friends, your community, and visit friends, visit your family back in North Carolina. Um, and that's amazing.
Yeah, I definitely have appreciated that. And then I guess on top of that as well, I um, got my hometown house. And so it has been paid off for a while, which I'm also very thankful for. And so I rent that as well. And so I have it's not a lot of people in this town. You're not charging, no one's charging more than like $1,200 for a place to rent there. And so it's not a massive amount of money, but again, it's enough where you're like, oh, like
So
I
were
have
you
a
an
little bit more
expert in
freedom.
like home rental properties when before that?
No, not at all. And I still would say I'm very much not I'm an expert at all. Thankfully, the person that rents out my hometown house is the pastor of my hometown church. And so he has kind of been involved with my family. I've known him most of my life. He has worked at this church. He knew my mother very well. He knew my family. He knows my family very well. And he does tend to skew a very private person as well. And so secretly, he had actually been living in my hometown for a couple of years before. He used to live 45-ish minutes away, and everyone thought he still did. And he had secretly moved to our house, to our town, and nobody knew except for a very select few people. And I ended up being one of those people. Once this kind of time came along, he was like, hi, like, I don't know what you want to do with this house, but I would definitely rent it if you would allow me to. And I think the comfortability and the closeness of our relationship and his relationship with my family meant that I didn't have to do very much. We very much just talked about, what furniture would you like to stay in this home? What furniture do you not want to stay in this home? How
Hmm.
many of these rooms would you like to be cleared out? Do you want everything out of this house? What does that look like? And again, just due to the relationship itself, my family came in. We cleared out a good bit of kind of junk, but the bedroom, what used to be my bedroom, actually is now our storage room where he holds a lot of his storage stuff, and I still have a whole bunch of stuff there,
Wow.
which I'm very, very, very thankful for, because I do not know what I would do with a good bit of that stuff at the time, just because
Yeah.
I currently rent as well in Florida. And so moving what I would consider permanent pieces to Florida, not even knowing how long or like what that looks like, whether or not I will ever be permanent here, moving permanent pieces into an apartment. Like, I'm not, there's a china cabinet that is probably like 10 feet wide. And I'm like, that's not coming to my apartment. So,
Right.
like, I want to either leave this here or I have to put in a storage unit, which would have also been fine. But just the familiarity of him and I knowing each other and him being the one that rents out my hometown house made it really easy to also have that.
Yeah. That's a sounds like a best case scenario in my situation with my dad. We had to sell a lot of his homes and therefore sell a lot of the furniture. And I was in college at the time. So I brought up like this whole cabinet, dresser, and like love seat. And it just did not fit in my college house. It was actually really funny. But people would come over and, like sit in this fancy chair, fancy couch. And, we enjoyed it. But um, it sounds like a lot of times with people, the people who inherit the house, the property, it becomes a burden. And for you, you found a situation that worked, which is amazing.
Yeah, it was really great. Initially, I had looked at just selling it because my family does live up there already. And so it was kind of like, I don't necessarily know if I'll ever want to live in my hometown. And so I kind of looked into selling it. And coincidentally, the son of the man that my mom had basically a handshake deal with to buy his home, the son of that guy reached out to me to see if I wanted to sell it back to him so that he could have it back in his family. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and so now we kind of like we have an unwritten agreement also where if I do ever go to sell it, they will be the first people I ask.
Yeah. That's a benefit of a small town feel where you know everybody in your town.
No, 1,000%.
How were there any like really tough decisions, other financial decisions that you had to make? And you mentioned that, coming out of college and in high school, um, you had a different mindset from your mom then. And so how did your relationship with money change after she died?
I would say I think that I started to, I think in this position, kind of given how much hard work and how much time and how much effort my mom had gone into saving all of this, there was this huge feeling of like, well, you can't screw this up.
Mm,
Like in 10 years, you can't be negative dollars in your bank account because that would just be wild. And I think, I don't know, almost disrespectful in a way,
yeah.
to just not see it the same way as her. And so I definitely think that I look at kind of those accounts and the pension and things like that as a little bit more sacred and a little bit more like you cannot screw this up. Like you've got to just kind of try and stay a little bit more budgeted and a little bit better. And I mean, with the money that she had saved and all of that being deposited in my bank account was kind of like there's definitely an air of like guilt in it where this is all she ever asked me to do was to like save money and to make sure that I was going to be able to retire when I'm 59 and a half or whatever age and make sure that I'm not ever living paycheck to paycheck. And I think getting and inheriting those things, I think the guilt kind of outweighs the feeling of like ever wanting to spend any of it.
Mm.
where it's like, okay, well, now I sit in a position where like I do get a pension that ensures I have a roof over my head and food on the table. I have accounts now where even if I don't save another dollar for the next however many 34 years, if I don't save another dollar, I could still retire at 59 and a half and be perfectly fine. Um, and so I think with that, there's a decent amount of guilt, but I also think that my mom never she tried to steer me in a little bit more of a stable direction and more responsibility when it came with money as well. But I would never say that she lacked any sort of support for things that I wanted to do that was going to make it feel like I was living my life. Like I moved from North Carolina to Florida because I got tired and bored of North Carolina. And that is a comfortability and a like blessing that not very many people have where they can just move to a completely different state kind of on a whim, um, and just figure it out.
Yeah. I, it's super interesting because it resonates so much with me. And one of the reasons that I started the podcast is that feeling of, well, you can't screw this up. You just got this money. You got this money because a parent, your person passed away before they should have. And now you got the money and you can't screw it up. It almost feels like more like a burden than a gift because I'm sure, and I'll speak for myself, I'd rather give all the money back to have another year or a month with my dad.
Right. I think, I don't know if I've ever even necessarily thought that exact thought either. It's obviously where kind of like the guilt lies. But I think my mom was just, I think that I don't feel maybe necessarily that way just because I think my mom was just ready.
Yeah.
I think she was so prepared and she was so okay with passing away that feeling the feeling of like, oh, well, if I didn't have this money, then she would still be here, or like vice versa. Oh, if she was still here, I wouldn't have this money. It's like, yeah, but she was kind of okay with heading out anyway. And so now, kind of, what can I do with this money to still be able to live my life? Because she never didn't want me to live my life. She always supported that. And I always had a really good foundation, a really good home base for all the times that I did screw it up.
It sounds like you're really honoring her legacy by just living your life to its fullest, which is what she would have wanted.
Yeah. And so I think like because of the benefits and all of those accounts, it is like, well, I don't have to save another dollar. So then, like, how do I live my life? And like, what do I do in my free time? And like, how many hours of the day am I like not doing anything or like scrolling through my phone or just kind of like existing when I could be doing other things? And so, a lot of my volleyball is now my other full time job outside of my salary job. But it's what my salary funds. So, it makes sense.
Understood. Um, so what else was hard that you didn't expect to be?
I think just really happy moments or moments that would have been really exciting and really celebratory. Um, all they are all just unfortunately now bittersweet in that you look around. For example, my family and I just went to um, a city in North Carolina that my family has always visited every year at the beach. And we just did a 4 day trip up there last week. And it was all great. And like being there was fun. But then on my way back, it was like, I feel like that would have been way more fun if my mom had been there.
Mm.
Um, and so even just sitting around with them, it's like, well, this is all nice and this is good. And I'm glad to be here and spend time with my family. I think it all just is a little strange, and it does feel like everything's a little tinted when those happy moments come about. They either feel kind of just more gray or less colorful, depending on how you kind of want to look at it. But I think that was something that I didn't necessarily expect. Obviously, I thought about the bigger moments of like, okay, well, I'm going to get married one day and she won't be there. I'm going to have kids one day and she won't be there. And those are all more obvious. Whereas I feel like even just the smaller day to day or week to week or month to month things, you're like, oh, like just another kind of feeling of like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah. It I hear you. The big moments are obvious, but it's the small moments that really do hit you hard. And the big moments, but small moments, there's a lot more of them.
Yeah, for sure. Like I ended up on the news in February and my whole family was like freaking out. And I think that was one of those times where I was like, oh, I wish I could call my mom and tell her about that.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Hopefully it was a positive news segment.
It was, thankfully, it was for work.
um and then how has your experience changed the way you talk about life, money, planning, legacy with your own family now?
Was my own family because they are all older, the oldest one being 85 and the youngest one being 67. Um, those two in particular own their homes in my hometown house. They're both paid off as well. And one, my hometown only has one lawyer. Didn't love them. Didn't love the process. Didn't love the money that they were asking my family to pay to do all of kind of the estate stuff. And so I very much encouraged them. Well, encouraged. I asked them very nicely to please go and find a different lawyer and to set up a will with a different lawyer, maybe outside of that area, as well as I asked them to add me onto their house deeds. Her house being on probate was only for around 6 months or so, which, according to a lot of people, is a really, really short amount of time, which I am thankful for. But I also know that could have been easier because for about 6 months, I didn't know what was going on. And we had to pay more taxes. Well, not more, but we had to pay the house taxes. We had to pay the insurance and we had to figure out those kinds of things, but we didn't necessarily know what was going to happen with the house. And
Yeah.
so I've now encouraged my family to also change over those things into my name so that time period doesn't happen again, and it'll be a lot easier of a transition.
So, how are you going about having those conversations? Because small town family vibe, like, I don't know. I can imagine that maybe this is like money isn't always talked about on the dining room table, like around the dinner table and stuff like that. And so, how are you going about having those conversations, bringing it up? And why is transferring the deed, besides probate, just like super important and peace of mind?
I waited a long time. I mean, I probably didn't bring this conversation up until a couple of months ago, so more a little bit after the 1 year mark or so. And I kind of just asked my aunt, like, what her plan with the house was, if it was in her name. And I basically just requested that she put it into my name just because there are two people that live also in that house with my aunt. So if there were to ever be a weird time period where we're not sure what's going on with the house, I don't necessarily think that those people would get kicked out, but it would be a lot easier if we already knew, like, well, this is now the person that owns this house, or this it's already in her name. So nothing essentially would change
Yeah.
with the home. It would just be a matter of property tax and the insurance and things like that.
And this is so you could take over the responsibility without a hiccup,
Yeah,
without the courts getting involved, without anybody having to be like evicted or anything like that.
yeah, exactly. I think in order for the transition to be the smoothest, if you have someone else's, if my name, assuming that they pass before I do, having their house in my name just makes it so that there's no transition period. Essentially, it would
Yeah.
just kind of, it would still stay the same. Everything can stay the same. And so I think having that conversation with them was important, just because there are people that live there. And if we think of the time period, right, we'll be grieving. So I don't want to worry about whether or not these people can still continue to live in this house, and or like where they would go if the house were in probate, and like what happens kind of in that time period.
Mm, that's amazing. That's like so important to just have it's really having a plan and putting somebody else on there who could make the decisions in a time of crisis and grief.
Yeah.
Olivia, as we wrap up here, I want you to imagine when someone comes to you. You mentioned your friend who's going through this, but going through something similar. But I want you to imagine someone comes to you and they've just experienced the loss of their mom. What type of grief mantras or words of wisdom would you want to tell that person or leave our audience with?
I think that, I mean, people say day by day, but there were some days where I was like, it's just minute by minute right now. Like,
Mm,
I, some good advice that I feel like I got around that time period was just that time will be the ultimate healer of grief, and that today it sucks, tomorrow it might suck, the next day might suck, and you will have lots of sucky days, and then one day you will just not have quite as sucky of a day.
yeah.
I really wish I was more eloquent in my words sometimes, but that's really what I got. It's just that sometimes it sucks. And it's going to suck a lot until it doesn't. But one day it will not as much. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's the main perspective that I have, even recently, because of my friend. I have been thinking more of it, because I think him sharing that with me, that he will soon experience the same thing, was just that, like, I don't know, it's just, you have to allow the time to kind of pass and exist. Um, and that time is definitely the biggest thing that you just have to kind of sit with and deal with. It was kind of the biggest moment, I think, since my mom has passed, that I had experienced so much empathy for someone else, was when that person was sharing that with me, just because I know what it looks like, and everyone experiences grief differently. And so I think the ultimate is just that time will be the healer for that. And I think looking at it as a way to continue to live your life kind of in honor of that person, um, to not let it stop you from doing things like that,
Yeah.
and just continuing to live.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I love living your life in honor of that person, because that's what we are. We are made up of the people who have raised us and impacted our lives along the way. And that doesn't have to change if they're not presently here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Olivia, is there anything else that you want to share, leave our audience with as we wrap up here?
I don't think so. I think that's about all I got.
Well, this has been an amazing episode. I can't thank you enough for reaching out to me on TikTok. That's just a plug to go follow all of our socials, The Currency of Grief, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok, and on YouTube. Please feel free to subscribe. But podcast listeners, this has been another episode of The Currency of Grief. It's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.